Look around you. Every day, men are screaming to be heard, online, in arguments, in relationships, at work, begging to be respected, begging to be understood. But the ones who get what they want, they don't beg, they don't scream, they don't argue. They sit in silence and command the room. The man who speaks less, but means more, is the one everyone fears. And that's not philosophy, that's survival, that's strategy, that's power. This is where Stoicism comes in, not as an ancient idea carved into a dusty stone, but as the most brutal, effective code of conduct you've never fully embraced. Stoicism is about control, not of others, but of yourself, your energy, your reactions, your words. Every time you argue, every time you explain yourself to people who already decided they won't understand you, you lose. You give them your center. You give them a map to your weak points. But when you choose silence, you flip the entire game. They speak, you watch, they react, you observe, they expose, you calculate, and suddenly you're not the one getting pulled into chaos. You're the one directing it. Think about your own life. How many times have you walked away from a conversation feeling like they didn't get it, like you said too much, like you opened up your world to someone who used it against you? That's what happens when you try to win arguments in a world where most people aren't even listening to understand. They're listening to control. And here's the truth. Silence scares people. It makes them uncomfortable, because when you say nothing, they're forced to sit with their own thoughts, their own guilt, their own fears, and they'll project all of that onto you. You become a mirror, and they hate what they see. That's your advantage. Your silence isn't empty, it's loaded, it's deliberate. It's the message that says, I don't need to respond to this because I'm not on your level. This video will walk you through 4 brutal truths that will shift how you think, move, and speak, or rather, how you learn when not to speak. Every lesson is designed to rebuild you from the inside out, not into a louder man, but into a more dangerous one. A man who doesn't flinch, a man who doesn't explain, a man who doesn't seek validation because he's too busy building an empire inside his mind. Support this channel if you want this message to reach the men who need it most. Every click helps this truth travel further. You're not just watching, you're helping build a world where silence becomes a language of kings. Comment, silence is my strength, if you're ready to step into that world. Number 1, master yourself first. Mastering yourself is not just a principle, it is the single most critical line you must draw if you ever hope to become untouchable, unreadable, and unbreakable in a world that feeds off your emotional leakage. You can't outmaneuver the world if you can't first sit still with your own darkness, not hide it, not escape it, not distract yourself from it with noise or numbing or external validation, but sit in it, stare into it, and tame it until it no longer controls your reactions. Think of every time you've lost your temper in traffic, every time you fired back a message just to feel in control, every time someone said something subtle, just sharp enough to jab at your pride, and you found yourself talking too much, explaining too quickly, spiraling into damage control. Now look at the result. Did you gain control, or did you lose it? Did you feel stronger, or did you walk away with that bitter taste of regret, knowing deep down you just let them see inside your soul? That's not power, that's exposure. That's letting people live rent-free inside your emotions. And if you're honest with yourself, you've been there more times than you want to admit. And you're not alone. The modern world has trained men to equate reaction with strength, as if your ability to clap back in a heated moment defines your dominance. But real power doesn't shout, it doesn't rush, it doesn't need an audience. Real power is internal, forged in silence, and revealed only when necessary. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events," Realize this, and you will find strength. He wasn't delivering a motivational quote. He was issuing a challenge to master the only kingdom that ever mattered: yourself. The man who masters his thoughts becomes a force. The man who doesn't becomes a pawn. That's why emotional discipline isn't optional. It's essential. You think the world respects rage? Number. The world respects restraint. The man who hears the insult and doesn't flinch. The man who hears the lie, the attack, the betrayal and smiles, not because he's weak, but because he knows he is unshakable. Imagine being the man who never has to raise his voice, never has to prove a point, never has to convince anyone of anything, because his presence alone speaks louder than any speech. That kind of presence comes from war. The kind you fight when no one's watching. The kind where you learn to delay your reaction by 2 seconds, then 10 seconds, then 10 minutes, until your first impulse is no longer to react, but to assess. Think about the last time you overreacted. Who benefited? Who won? Now imagine that same situation, but you said nothing. You simply observed. You let the other person fill the space with their own insecurity, their own overexposure. That is power. And it's not theoretical, it's practical. When you master yourself, you control negotiations without uttering a word. You command respect in relationships without demanding it. You set boundaries with body language. You navigate confrontation with surgical precision. Picture a man in a heated meeting. His peers are arguing, raising voices, pointing fingers. He listens. He doesn't move. He leans back, keeps eye contact, breathes slow. When he finally speaks, 3 sentences cut through the noise like a blade. Not because they were perfect, but because they came from a place of clarity, not chaos. You've seen this man, you've felt his energy, and deep down, you've wanted to be him. But you don't become him by reading quotes or watching videos. You become him by choosing discomfort over drama. You become him by facing your triggers and disarming them, one by one. That means you don't just avoid conflict, you train yourself not to need it. You stop relying on validation to feel centered. You stop seeking recognition to feel real. Ask yourself, if no one praised you, if no one clapped, if no one noticed your efforts, would you still move with the same intensity? That's the test. Because when you're rooted in self-mastery, applause becomes irrelevant, criticism becomes background noise, and silence becomes your arena. Most men fill silence because they're afraid of what it says. But you will own it. You will let it breathe. You will watch how others twitch, stutter, and stumble trying to interpret you, and you'll say nothing. Because you don't need to be understood, you need to be effective. And effectiveness requires you to be strategic with your voice and surgical with your reactions. That's why the first rule of outsmarting everyone is to first outsmart yourself. Outsmart your ego. Outsmart your need to be seen. Outsmart your craving to explain. You'll notice it most when dealing with people who bait you, that toxic friend, the partner who pokes at your pride, the colleague who questions your competence. They want your fire. Don't give it to them. Give them calm. Give them nothing. Not out of fear, but out of control. That's what breaks them. That's what reveals you. You are no longer here to defend your name to the world. You're here to live in such a way that your silence becomes its own defense. Your results speak louder than any rebuttal, and your peace, your indifference, becomes your strongest position. This doesn't mean becoming cold. It means becoming clear. It means choosing to respond only when necessary, only when impactful, only when it moves the needle. Otherwise, you stay silent, you stay focused, you stay in the lab, building, refining, ascending. You'll lose some people on this path. Good. Let them go. Their confusion about your silence is their own burden to carry. Your only responsibility is to master yourself, daily, brutally, ruthlessly, until silence becomes your weapon, presence becomes your power, and every move you make is made with precision, not impulse. Because the world doesn't need another man reacting. It needs one who knows how to wait, observe, and move only when it's time to strike, without ever raising his voice. Number 2. Speak less, dominate more. To dominate without speaking is not a trick, not a tactic, not something you learn in a book and apply like a quote. It is a mindset, a discipline, a lifestyle that demands every fiber of your being to reject the desperate pull to be seen, to be heard, to be liked, and instead operate from a place of internal validation, so fierce, so grounded, that silence itself becomes your sharpest edge. The men who dominate without speaking are not emotionless robots or passive observers. They are tacticians who understand that energy moves first and words follow. And when you move your energy with precision, still, calm, focused, your presence alone disrupts rooms, exposes people's insecurities, and makes the loudest voice feel empty. Ask yourself how many times in life you've spoken just to fill space, in meetings, on dates, in heated texts, in moments where you felt uncomfortable with the quiet, as if saying something was better than sitting with power. But now look back and ask, did your words improve your position, or did they weaken it? Did they clarify your power, or dilute it? Most men speak from insecurity, not strategy. They speak to be reassured, to be respected, to be validated. But here's the brutal truth. The more you explain, the less they believe you. The more you talk, the more they question your certainty. The more you try to prove, the more they sense you're unsure. And that's why the men who speak the least, and mean the most, are feared and respected at levels most will never experience. Picture a courtroom, one man yelling, the other quiet. Which one looks guilty? Which one looks in control? Or imagine walking into a business negotiation. One man can't stop talking about his product, his value, his credentials. The other leans back, watches, maybe nods, maybe raises an eyebrow, speaks only when it changes the trajectory of the room. Who do you think they believe more? That's not luck, that's leverage. And you gain that leverage not by saying less randomly, but by training yourself to be ruthlessly strategic about when you speak, why you speak, and whether what you're about to say gives away your hand or reinforces your mystique. This applies in relationships too, when she pushes you to react, accuses you to test your frame, provokes you to see if you'll crumble. The man who resists the bait doesn't just pass a test, he resets the entire power dynamic. You don't match her energy. You hold yours. You don't try to change her mood. You regulate your own. You don't respond out of insecurity. You observe and let her confront her own. Now apply this to your daily life. When a colleague makes a slick remark to see if you'll bite, when a fake friend shares a story meant to undermine you, when a stranger sizes you up with that subtle challenge in his eyes. You don't react because your presence is already doing the talking. You stand firm, you hold eye contact, you say less, and in doing so, you speak volumes. This isn't about silence for silence's sake. It's about making every word count. It's about recognizing that when you speak without purpose, you devalue your voice, and when you stay silent with purpose, you build mystery, respect, and perceived authority. Think about a man you respect deeply. Odds are, he doesn't ramble, he doesn't chase attention, he doesn't post every thought online, argue with every troll, or answer every insult. He selects his battles, not out of fear, but out of clarity. That's because speech without control is self-sabotage. It reveals too much. And in a world that will weaponize your words the moment you expose them, silence becomes your shield, your filter, your fortress. You control when the gates open, if ever. But how do you embody this practically? First, create distance between stimulus and response. If someone asks you a question, pause. If someone insults you, pause. If someone pressures you for a reaction, give none. Count to 3. Breathe. Let the silence stretch until they start to fidget, until their confidence falters, until they say too much trying to compensate for what you didn't give them. That's when you've already won. Second, practice conversational minimalism. This doesn't mean you talk like a robot. It means you train your speech like a sniper trains his shot. You don't waste a single word. You deliver with calm. You end with certainty. You don't just say something to avoid awkwardness, because awkwardness is power if you know how to hold it. Let them be uncomfortable. Let them wonder what you're thinking. Let them work harder to impress you, please you, earn your voice. Third, build environments where your silence speaks for you. That means your posture, your grooming, your tone, your timing, your eye contact, all of it working together to communicate depth, clarity, and confidence without needing verbal reinforcement. You walk into a room and they know you're not a man to be played with. You hold your silence like a sword, sheathed but sharp. And finally, understand this. The man who dominates with silence does not do so by accident. He does so because he has trained his mind to remain still in chaos, to resist the addictive pull of attention, and to separate his value from his visibility. When you speak less, you dominate more, not just others, but yourself. You dominate your fear of being misunderstood. You dominate your ego's craving to prove something. You dominate every weak part of you that still thinks noise equals power. But once you taste the effect of silence, once you see people reveal themselves just to break your stillness, once you feel the shift in power that happens when you don't take the bait, you'll never go back. You'll become the man who doesn't need to fight to be felt, the man who doesn't need to argue to be right, the man whose silence makes others speak too much, reveal too much, give too much, while you stay composed, unreadable, dominant. That is the art. That is the power of saying less and owning more. Number 3, control is power. Control isn't something you perform, it's something you become, and until you become it, everything you do, say, and feel will be dictated by invisible forces pulling at your mind, testing your emotions, and breaking you down in ways that feel personal but are actually just life. Seeing whether you've built yourself or simply disguised yourself, because most men are wearing armor made of reactions, fake confidence, and borrowed identities. But the man who masters control is the one who no longer needs the armor because he's built from within, forged in discipline, carved from pain, and refined in fire. And this kind of man walks through chaos with his hands still, his voice measured, his thoughts composed, and his mind clear. Not because life stopped testing him, but because he no longer needs to pass the test to prove anything to anyone. And if you think control is about hiding emotion, you've already missed the point. Control isn't suppression, it's redirection. It's the deliberate choice to channel your internal storms into precision, clarity, execution, and restraint. And if you don't believe that control is your greatest power, look back at every time you lost it and count the cost. The relationship you ruined because you couldn't stay calm, the opportunity you blew because you took something personal, the respect you lost because you let your emotions speak louder than your values, the woman who lost attraction because you became reactive, the self-respect you abandoned the moment you traded your long-term growth for short-term expression. And now ask yourself, how many of those moments could have gone differently if you had simply stayed quiet, breathed through it, held your position, and walked away with your dignity intact? Because the truth is, the world isn't looking for another loud man with no self-command. It's starving for men who don't need to raise their voice to assert their presence, Men who don't chase respect but draw it in with their restraint. Men who can take hits and still choose their response with surgical precision. And that kind of control doesn't come from a book or a quote or a seminar. It comes from ruthless self-examination, from facing the parts of yourself you've avoided, from admitting where you still flinch, still explode, still seek comfort in blaming others for your lack of structure. And building control means you start waking up before you want to, sitting with the resistance instead of escaping it, choosing the hard route every day, not because it feels good, but because it strengthens your muscle for emotional discipline. And if you think this only applies to heated arguments, think again, because control is how you speak to people when you're frustrated, how you move when you're overlooked, how you carry yourself when you're doubted, how you handle pressure when no one is watching, and how you respond when life hits you with delay, betrayal, rejection, and silence. And when that moment comes, because it will, you won't rise to the occasion. You'll fall to your level of training. And if your training has been built on reaction, then you'll collapse the same way you did last year. But if you've trained yourself to pause, to breathe, to ask, what does this cost me to respond, before saying a word, then you've already won. Because every person trying to pull you out of character loses the moment you refuse to leave it. And in that refusal, you gain something far more valuable than validation. You gain power, real, grounded, magnetic power that doesn't need to explain itself because it can be felt in your silence, seen in your posture, respected in your stillness. And the man who owns that level of composure isn't invincible, but he's so anchored, so centered, that even when he's hit, he doesn't fall apart. He adjusts, recalibrates, and continues forward. And this level of power doesn't scream, doesn't beg, doesn't prove. It moves with purpose, protects its peace, and projects a presence so stable that others feel their own chaos exposed when standing next to it. And if you've ever been in a room with a man who carried that presence, you know what it feels like. You feel yourself sit up straighter, choose your words more carefully, check your energy without him saying a thing, because control is contagious. And when you carry it deeply enough, people will begin regulating themselves in your presence without you lifting a finger. And to build this kind of control, you must reverse the habits you've built around reaction. You must replace scrolling with solitude, replace gossip with planning, replace complaining with action, and most of all, replace emotional impulses with purposeful responses. And that means when you feel anger rise, you don't vent, you train. When you feel disrespected, you don't fight, you calculate. When you feel unseen, you don't beg, you build. And when you feel the need to speak, you pause and ask, does this move me forward or simply release my discomfort? Because every word has a cost, every reaction is a transaction, and when you stop paying people with your peace, you begin to accumulate power. And the more power you accumulate, the less you need to announce it, because people feel it in your decision to disengage from noise, detach from chaos, and discipline your energy to move only when it matters. And the most dangerous men you'll ever meet are not the loudest, the strongest, or the most visible. They're the ones who move with controlled aggression, silent confidence, and calm precision. And you will only become one of them when you stop reacting like everyone else and start choosing your actions like a man who owns himself, every inch of himself, especially the parts that used to control him. Number 4, let them talk. Build yourself. Let them talk, not because you're ignoring them, not because you're weak, but because you are choosing a higher form of warfare, a discipline that most men are too emotionally fragile to maintain. And in that silence, you are constructing a future that doesn't need defending, a presence that doesn't need announcing, and a legacy that will echo far louder than the noise of anyone who ever doubted you, because the real power move is not proving them wrong with words, but proving them irrelevant through growth. And if you've ever been mocked for your vision, doubted for your dreams, laughed at for being different, misunderstood for your silence, then you are exactly where you need to be. Because the men who are building real value don't have time to explain themselves. And every time you're tempted to respond to the noise, to correct the rumor, to fight for clarity in a world addicted to distortion, you're being given a test. Can you hold your frame while they try to define you? Can you keep building while they keep talking? And can you resist the poison of needing to be understood by people who were never meant to understand you? And the moment you truly let go of the need to be seen is the moment you begin to see clearly. Because clarity comes not from being visible, but from being intentional. And being intentional means you build whether they clap or not, whether they agree or not, whether they're watching or not. Because men who win long-term don't need an audience. They need direction, and your direction should be internal first and ruthless second. Because if you're still getting distracted by criticism, gossip, envy, or comparison, you haven't set your internal GPS to its highest frequency yet, and until that signal is locked in, you'll keep drifting, chasing validation like it's oxygen, when in fact it's the very chain holding you back. And yes, they will mock your silence, mislabel your stillness, misinterpret your focus as arrogance, your detachment as bitterness, your solitude as sadness. But let them, because what they say says everything about them and nothing about the fortress you're building within. And that fortress isn't made of stone, it's made of routines, of early mornings when no one else is awake, of training when no one's watching, of studying while others scroll, of sacrificing ease for mastery, of doing the hard things so consistently that they become your second nature. And if you're really serious about building yourself, set up your life in a way that makes distraction physically difficult. Create a workspace that eliminates temptation. Structure your days by time blocks, not moods. Identify the people in your life who drain your energy and limit your access to them like your future depends on it. Because it does. Stop explaining your moves to people who have no vision beyond the weekend. Stop trying to gain approval from crowds who cheer failure and ridicule effort. And stop being emotionally available to energy that isn't building you, because your energy is your equity, and if you're spending it on defending yourself, you're going broke emotionally. And the reason so many men feel hollow despite working hard is because they keep depositing effort into an account they don't own, the account of others' opinions. And you have to start investing in internal assets, discipline, consistency, calm, resilience, and long-term thinking. And that starts with accepting one unshakable truth. Not everyone will understand your silence, and not everyone needs to, because you are not building a consensus, you are building a kingdom. And the blueprints for that kingdom are sacred, private, and personal, which means they are not up for debate, not for show, and not open to negotiation. So let them talk while you perfect your systems. Let them laugh while you sharpen your edge. Let them speculate while you go dark, and let them count you out while you count your reps, your pages, your ideas, your progress, and your unbreakable momentum. Because when the time comes to re-emerge, you won't need to tell them you've changed. They'll feel it in your presence, they'll see it in your results, and they'll regret ever thinking their noise could stop your mission. And that mission must be defined not by applause, but by alignment, which means every habit, every choice, every association must serve the man you are becoming. And anything that doesn't serve that man must be ruthlessly cut away. Even if it's comfortable, even if it's familiar, even if it screams for your attention like an old friend, because your future does not have room for the noise of your past. And when you live this way, intentionally, quietly, brutally focused, you begin to emit a frequency that silence amplifies. People start wondering what you're up to. Women feel your groundedness, men respect your distance, and opportunities that once ran from your desperation now come to your stability, because real power doesn't chase, it attracts. And real attraction isn't volume, it's value, the kind of value you build in the gym when it's empty, In your journal when your mind is racing, in your craft when no one believes, in your heart when everything is silent, and only you know the weight you're carrying and the mountain you're climbing. And when you embrace that silence, you realize it's not a void, it's a forge, and you are being reforged in every moment you choose, building over reacting, growth over gossip, mastery over mediocrity, and purpose over pettiness. So let them talk, let them doubt, let them wait for your response that will never come, because they don't deserve the version of you that was always explaining, always trying, always begging to be seen. That version is gone, buried under the hours, the pain, the lessons, the late nights, the broken plans, and the quiet rebuild. And the man who emerges will not speak to prove anything. He will simply move differently, breathe differently, and walk into rooms with a silence so earned, so pure, so powerful that even the loudest voice in the room won't know what to say next. Because nothing is louder than a man who speaks only when it shifts the world around him. And that's who you're becoming, in silence, in stillness, in discipline, and in undeniable action. You don't need to raise your voice to raise your life. You don't need to explain yourself to be understood, and you don't need to be seen to become unstoppable. The truth is, every word you don't speak becomes another brick in the fortress of who you're becoming. In your silence, they'll wonder. In your stillness, they'll feel your edge. And in your control, they'll either fall in line or fall away. Let them talk. Let them doubt. Let them misunderstand you. Because while they gossip, compare, and compete, you build. Quietly, consistently, ruthlessly. And when the dust settles, when the noise fades, when the world finally sees what you've become, they'll realize your silence was never weakness. It was preparation, power, presence. Now go live that. Don't flinch. Don't respond. Build yourself into the man whose silence speaks louder than 1,000 voices. If this resonated, subscribe to this channel. Help bring this message to men who need it before it's too late. Every like, comment, and share fuels this mission. Drop the phrase, "Silence is golden," in the comments to lock this mindset in for life.